It began in a small town tucked between golden hills and thick woods, the kind of place where the streets stayed quiet, neighbors waved from porches, and fall brought a postcard-perfect charm. Millersfield was its name, a town where time seemed to slow down when the air turned cool. Every year, when the calendar turned to October, the town would burst into color. Leaves blazing in bright red and orange, pumpkin patches filling up with laughter, and the smell of cinnamon drifting from every bakery window. But that particular year, something felt wrong. It wasn't sudden. It crept in, quiet and strange, like a shadow at the edge of sight. The trees changed earlier than usual, but their colors weren't the soft hues of fall. They were sharp, almost glowing, like fresh wounds instead of autumn beauty. There was something unsettling in how the leaves clung to the branches, twitching in the wind like they didn't want to fall. Even the air carried a different weight. It didn't carry the usual crispness, nor did it smell of dry leaves and chimney smoke. Instead, it reeked of burnt iron and something foul beneath it, like rotting earth after a rainstorm. People noticed, but no one said anything out loud. They looked over their shoulders more, walked their dogs a little earlier, and kept their porch lights on longer at night. Something was wrong, but the silence around it made it worse. When birds started vanishing from the sky and squirrels stopped, racing across the lawns, the town's silence deepened. And when pets began disappearing, cats never coming home, dogs barking into the woods and then falling quiet, everyone began to feel the same quiet fear, the kind no one wants to speak about. It was during this strange shift that Lily's cousin decided to visit. Lily lived near the woods, at the very edge of town where the trees grew taller, older, and darker. The visit was meant to be a small escape, a breath of fresh air away from city noise. But the timing couldn't have been worse. On the day of arrival, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds, and the wind felt colder than it should have in early fall. Her house stood quiet at the tree line, with the forest pressing against the back porch like it was waiting. At first, there was only curiosity about the town's odd quietness and the heavy, strange feeling in the air. But that first night changed everything. In the silence, just past midnight, a sound echoed through the woods, long and sharp, like someone screaming in pain far away. It wasn't a fox or coyote. It was human, and it didn't fade. It stopped suddenly, as if cut off. The visitor sat, up in bed, heart racing, eyes wide, unsure of what had just been heard. But deep down, there was already a knowing. Something about Millersfield had changed this fall. And whatever it was, it had only just begun. That first night in Lily's house, sleep didn't come easily. The eerie silence outside her window felt unnatural, as though the world had forgotten how to make noise. The trees in the backyard stood still, their branches twisting in strange angles like they were reaching for something, someone. Hours passed, and despite the cozy surroundings, something gnawed at the visitor's thoughts. At 2 a.m., the unsettling stillness was broken. A scream, sharp and filled with raw terror, sliced through the silence. It was human, unmistakably so. The scream echoed through the night air, long and agonizing. It sounded far away, but the terror in it was so real that it made the hair on the back of the neck stand up. No animal could make that sound. It was a scream of someone in pain, someone begging for help. The sound didn't fade. It lingered, stretching into the cold night like a desperate cry for mercy. The visitor rushed to Lily's room, heart pounding, in confusion and fear. "Did you hear that?" came the question, though the words barely left the lips before Lily's face fell. She had heard it, and it wasn't the first time. Lily didn't look startled or afraid. Instead, there was a calmness to her as she told the visitor, "That's the screaming tree. It started last fall. Every year, around this time, it screams, but no one talks about it." There was something in Lily's voice, something dark and tired, as though she had said these words too many times, as though she knew exactly what it meant. The visitor pressed for more details, trying to rationalize the situation, to dismiss it as a figment of overactive imaginations. But Lily's eyes didn't waver. It's not just any tree. It calls to people. And if you're close enough, it can pull you in, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly despite her calm demeanor. The visitor didn't know what to say. It felt absurd. An old town legend, something whispered among the locals who might be overreacting. But the chill that had settled over the house felt too real to ignore. Is it real? The visitor asked, hesitant to hear the answer. Lily nodded slowly, her gaze distant. She had never been one for ghost stories or myths, but this wasn't like the ones she had heard as a child. This was different, darker. It had been happening for years, longer than anyone cared to admit. And people who dared to investigate, who followed the screams or ventured too close, never came back the same. The few who did return came back changed. Not physically, but mentally. They were never the same. The town had its stories, its old superstitions, but there was a truth in Lily's words. Something in the air had shifted, something ancient stirred in the woods, and the screaming tree was at the center of it all. There was no escaping it. The more the visitor thought about it, the more the weight of the situation sank in. What had started as a curiosity, a strange sound in the night, had now become something much worse. An old town curse that refused to stay buried in the past, and it had only just begun. The morning after the horrifying scream, the town seemed eerily quiet, almost too quiet. The usual hum of the city, the soft chatter of neighbors, and the familiar sounds of dogs barking in the distance had all disappeared, replaced by a suffocating silence. The air felt heavier now, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The visitor and Lily decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would ease the uneasy feeling that had settled in their bones. As they stepped outside, the crisp fall air hit them, but it wasn't the pleasant chill they expected. The wind carried a strange scent, something metallic and faintly rotten, which made the visitor pause. It wasn't right, but the sense of dread was growing by the minute. The streets were lined with the usual mix of reds, oranges, and yellows. But as they walked down the sidewalk, something caught the visitor's eye. At the far end of the block, an old oak tree stood, its once vibrant leaves now dark and unsettling. They weren't brown or red, or even the bright yellow of the usual fall foliage. No, these leaves were black, deep, dark black, as if they had been burned, yet they still clung to the branches with unnatural tenacity. The leaves weren't falling like the others. Instead, they trembled in the wind, as though they were alive, and the sight of them made the visitor's stomach turn. Lily noticed the way the visitor stared at the tree. "Don't go near it," she whispered, her voice tense, eyes darting nervously to the blackened leaves. "That tree isn't like the others. It's not just the leaves. It's something about the ground beneath it, something in the roots. People don't go near it anymore." Her words were low, urgent. The visitor turned to Lily, sensing the fear in her tone, and asked what she meant. With a sigh, Lily explained the growing rumors, how the blackened trees were starting to spread. It had begun last year with just one tree, but now there were several scattered through the woods, and the blackened leaves were making their way into the yards. The townspeople had started to avoid these areas, but not because of the leaves. It wasn't just the eerie appearance, it was the fact that something unnatural followed in their wake. The trees weren't just changing colors, they were infecting the land around them. Pets that wandered too close to the trees would vanish, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Neighbors' dogs had disappeared after being let out for their evening walks, their collars found, but no trace of their bodies. And the people who ventured into the woods to investigate? They returned, but they weren't the same. One man had gone into the woods to see what was happening to the trees. When he came back, he didn't speak. for days. The only sound he made was a low, guttural murmur, as if something had clamped its hand around his throat. He could no longer form words. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and fixed on something only he could see. The visitor shivered, the image of the man's broken mind haunting them. Lily's voice broke through the silence, her warning clear. "People don't touch the black leaves. They don't go near the trees. Whatever is happening, it's spreading, and it's getting worse." The visitor could feel it now, the same oppressive atmosphere that seemed to hang over the town like a dark cloud. There was something more to these trees, something twisted and old that refused to be ignored. Whatever was behind the leaves wasn't finished. It was just getting started. As days passed, the air grew colder, and the shadows in the town seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if the light itself was beginning to retreat. The blackened leaves that clung to the trees became more prominent, their ominous presence impossible to ignore. People started staying inside more, avoiding the woods, and the whispers about the trees grew louder. Strange things were happening, and the town, once so alive with the buzz of fall festivals and the scent of harvest, now felt more like a ghost town, haunted by something unseen but terribly real. Even Lily had become more withdrawn, her usual warmth replaced by a nervous energy that seemed to pulse in the air whenever she spoke of the woods or the trees. She would glance nervously out the window, eyes darting between the towering trees that lined the outskirts of the town. One evening, as the wind picked up, a strange phenomenon began to occur. The leaves, which had already taken on their unnerving black color, started to stir in a way that defied natural explanation. The wind, though present, was no longer the soft, familiar breeze of autumn. It was sharper now, carrying with it a faint, unintelligible whispering, as though the trees themselves were speaking. At first it was so soft that the sound blended into the background noise of the evening, but soon it grew louder, clearer. The whispers carried on the wind, flowing through the trees, curling into the very corners of the town, as though they were trying to reach every ear. No one could make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a voice, more than one voice, low and eerie, as if a chorus of ancient spirits was calling from within the forest, begging to be heard. Lily, having lived in Millersfield all her life, had heard these whispers before, though she couldn't remember when they had started or how they had evolved. She knew one thing for certain: the wind didn't carry natural sounds. There was something wrong about it, a deep, unsettling wrongness that made every bone in the body tremble. As the whispers grew louder, so did the unease in the town. The more people listened, the more they began to feel a strange pull, an overwhelming need to walk toward the woods, to get closer to the sound, to understand what was calling out from the dark. Lily tried to warn the visitor, her voice shaking with fear. "The wind. It's not just the trees. It's the land itself. It's trying to draw us in." She spoke urgently, her eyes wide with an understanding that seemed beyond what words could explain. The visitor had heard the whispers, felt the pull too. And now, a sense of dread settled deep within their chest. It was as if the wind wasn't just carrying sounds. It was carrying something far more sinister. A warning, perhaps, or an invitation. Either way, it was clear that whatever lay at the heart of these whispers wasn't going to stay hidden for much longer. The town was being pulled into the grip of something ancient and malevolent, something that fed off the fear and curiosity of those who listened. No one was safe. The trees, the wind, and the whispering voices were just the beginning. The air seemed to thicken with every passing day, the weight of impending doom pressing down on the town like an invisible hand. People had started disappearing, vanishing without a trace, and the few who returned were never quite the same. They wandered through the streets, their eyes vacant, as though the life had been drained from them. Rumors spread like wildfire, whispers of strange figures in the woods, shadows moving with intent, and eyes watching from the trees. Fear took hold of Millersfield, spreading faster than the blackened leaves on the branches. Yet, despite the rising terror, something strange happened. Some people seemed to grow drawn to the very thing that terrified them. It was as if the town itself had become a trap, a place where those who ventured too far into the woods could never escape the pull of the unknown. Lily could feel it too, that magnetic force urging her to step closer to the darkness. The whispers, though still faint, seemed to be calling to her now, urging her to come to the trees, to find out what lay hidden in the shadows. She had always been a skeptic, a person who believed in logic and reason, but there was no denying that something far beyond understanding was at play. She felt like she was on the verge of something important, something that could change everything, and she couldn't stay away. On one fateful evening, Lily and the visitor decided to make the journey into the woods. Neither of them spoke as they stepped beyond the edge of the town, into the dense forest that had once been a familiar part of their lives. The trees loomed like ancient guardians, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands, beckoning them deeper into the darkness. The wind seemed to grow colder, sharper, and the once soft whispers now rose to a deafening crescendo. It felt like the entire forest was alive, breathing with an unseen presence. The visitor felt their heart pounding, each step becoming heavier as they followed Lily, whose gaze never left the path ahead, her face pale with a strange determination. They walked for what felt like hours, the trees growing denser, the path narrowing until it became nothing more than a faint trail leading into the heart of the woods. Then, they reached it, the clearing where the blackened trees stood, their twisted forms silhouetted against the dimming sky. The leaves that clung to them were darker now, almost like something out of a nightmare. The air here felt different, thick with a strange energy that made it hard to breathe. Lily stopped, her gaze fixed on the largest tree at the center of the clearing, the one that had begun it all. Its bark was gnarled and twisted, its branches reaching out like the arms of some dark, ancient creature. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the tree itself was speaking directly to them. Suddenly, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A low, deep rumble echoed from the roots of the trees, and the whispering voices became a chorus of anguished cries. It wasn't just the wind anymore. The earth itself was alive, stirring with something malevolent, something that had been buried for centuries. Lily's eyes widened in terror, and the visitor felt the undeniable presence of something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. The time had come, and there would be no turning back. The trees, the whispers, and the darkness. It was all part of something ancient and unstoppable. And now they were trapped in its grasp. The air grew thicker with every passing second, a dense fog enveloping the clearing, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. The once gentle rustle of the trees had turned into a low, guttural hum, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. The visitor could feel it, a pulse in the earth itself, as though something ancient was stirring beneath them. The whispers that had once been distant now surrounded them, an overwhelming cacophony of voices that seemed to come from every direction. The sound was maddening, incoherent, but filled with an undeniable urgency. Lily's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but there was something else there too, something deeper, almost hypnotic. Her body swayed, as though the whispers were pulling her toward something, urging her to join whatever force had taken root in this place. The visitor, still frozen in terror, could barely comprehend what was happening. Every instinct screamed for them to run, to flee back to the safety of the town, but something, some unseen force, held them in place. The ground shook again, harder this time, and the trees around them groaned, their twisted branches creaking, as if they were stretching toward the sky. It was then that the visitor noticed something they hadn't seen before. The roots of the largest tree were moving, not just shifting, but crawling, slowly inching across the ground, twisting and turning like the body of a great serpent. The very earth seemed to breathe, pulsating with an energy that felt dark and unnatural. The visitor's heart raced in, their chest, the whispers growing louder, now almost deafening. Lily took a hesitant step forward, her feet seemingly drawn to the blackened ground. Her hands reached out as if trying to touch the tree, to connect with whatever force was at work here. "It's time," she murmured, her voice distant and empty, as though she wasn't fully herself anymore. Her eyes glowed with a strange light, a reflection of something ancient and terrifying within her. The visitor reached out, trying to grab her arm, but it was as if her body was no longer her own. She was moving closer to the tree, closer to the very heart of whatever had been awakened. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, and the earth cracked beneath them. From the depths of the cracks, something emerged, something dark and massive, with roots like arms, pushing its way to the surface. It was as if the earth itself had opened to release something long buried, an ancient creature or force that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise. Again. The creature, if it could even be called that, was not fully visible, but the shape of it was unmistakable. Huge, twisting, covered in bark, its form an unsettling blend of tree and something far more sinister. The whispers became words, recognizable. Now, though, they were not meant to be heard. The voices screamed in a language older than time itself, their intent clear. The town, the people, the land. It was all part of the awakening. The creature was not merely feeding off fear. It was growing, pulling everything into its dark embrace. And Lily had become a part of it. She had been chosen, marked, and now she was bound to the entity that had awoken from the earth's depths. The visitor could only watch in horror as the dark force stretched its reach, pulling the very town into the nightmare that was about to unfold. The night fell heavy, the sky darker than it had ever been, as if the stars themselves were hiding from what was about to unfold. The town of Millersfield had been swallowed by a thick, suffocating fog that seemed to seep into every corner, every building, every soul. The whispers were no longer just sounds carried by the wind. They had become part of the town, lingering in the air like a curse. The people who remained were walking shadows, their eyes vacant, their minds trapped by whatever force had claimed the land. No one was untouched by the malevolent presence that had awakened from the earth. The air felt charged, electric, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something. For a moment, everything was still, and then, with a sudden jolt, the ground beneath the town shook violently. It wasn't just the clearing now. The entire town felt the tremors, the pulse of the dark force beneath their feet, growing stronger, closer. In the center of the town, Lily stood, her body stiff and unyielding, her eyes wide and empty, staring toward the forest. The last traces of humanity had drained from her face, leaving behind a cold, expressionless mask. She had become the vessel, the conduit, through which the ancient entity would reclaim its power. The visitor, now standing at a distance, watched, helplessly as the darkness spread. Every street corner, every alleyway seemed to vibrate with the whispers. They no longer sounded like mere voices. They were commands, pulling the remaining residents toward the forest, toward the twisted, gnarled trees that waited patiently, their branches outstretched like hands, ready to claim what was left of the living. The visitor tried to call out to Lily, but her voice was lost in the wind, swallowed by the growing chaos around them. With each passing second, the power of the entity grew stronger. The air grew colder still, frost creeping up from the ground, coating the buildings, the trees, everything. It was as if winter had come early, but this was no ordinary cold. This was the biting chill of death itself, a cold that seeped into the bones and froze the soul. The visitor's heart pounded, the weight of the situation pressing down harder than ever before. The streets were now filled with people, or what had once been people, walking in a trance-like state, their movements slow and deliberate as they made their way toward the woods. They did not speak, but the whispers filled their minds, pushing them forward, leading them to the place where it all began. The clearing was alive with movement now, the once silent trees swaying unnaturally, their branches twisting and writhing in the wind as though they were part of the creature that had risen. The ground continued to crack, opening up wider, revealing roots that were no longer just part of the earth. They were part of something larger, something older, something that had been here long before the town ever existed. And in the heart of it all stood Lily, her body becoming one with the dark force, her eyes no longer her own. She was no longer a person, but a tool, a conduit for the entity that would consume everything. And then, with one final, earth-shattering roar, the creature emerged fully from the depths of the earth, its massive form towering above the town. Its twisted roots spread out like fingers, gripping the land, pulling everything into its dark embrace. The wind howled, the whispers reached a deafening crescendo, and Millersfield was no more. The entity had awakened, and there was no escaping its grasp. The last remnants of the town were swallowed whole, leaving nothing but a haunting silence in its wake. The darkness had claimed its prize,